Hello, I'd like to share some information on your benchmark test. Um, some of the things we're looking at as far as validity and reliability of the benchmark test is the time between the benchmark and the SOL test. That could create some problems there. Whether or not remediation takes place after benchmark administration, and teachers who are good at that will outperform expectations. Pacing is also an issue. Sometimes if you're not on pace, that the benchmark score may not be valid. Also, benchmark administration, if it's seen as important or in the setting. So, for example, if a teacher just takes their students to the computer lab and doesn't stay with them to see what's going on there, that could create some problems. We're looking at some math pass rates and the average benchmark scores by school, and you'll see that these scores are showing where a benchmark score would be and where an SOL pass rate would be. And you want to try to look at the predictability. There's also some outliers there, so you can see that some of these scores are going along this trend line. This is where you would expect to be. Say, for example, if you had a 70% pass rate, your benchmark scores would be right around 50 or so. So that would be predictable if you're along this line. But there's some things that cause those scores to be outliers, and we'll talk about that as we go along. Reading, for example, is another one that would create. There's a lot of outliers as far as reading is concerned and how teachers teach that content. So it's important that you look at those and then you compare those to more successful teachers to the less successful teachers. This is looking at some math pass rates, SOL pass rates, and average benchmark scores by teachers, and we're looking at some outliers here. The lower performing teachers down here, these were one of them was a formerly successful teacher, one missed half a year. Another teacher had some FMLA issues from family medical leave. The most successful teachers, or outliers, are up here. Some of these things, this particular teacher didn't follow the pacing guide exactly. So I think in that case, the administrators would say, if you're successful, that's one of those things we may not need to worry so much about. But if you're not successful, you may have to look at those. Looking at some reading pass rates and average benchmark scores, one of the most successful outliers here pulled each student after their benchmark pass rate was at 70, but their SOL pass rate was at 93. They pulled a student the last 15 minutes if they failed a test or a benchmark to work on specific skills. Students that are weak are pulled 2 to 3 times a week during exploratory. There was at least 30 minutes of remediation 2 days a week with 2 kids at a time. And then there was a come to Jesus meeting with the administration as far as that was concerned about those scores, and something needed to be done. Some of the things about benchmarks leadership as far as at the building level, benchmarks make the leadership makes a benchmark meaningful and important. Reviews benchmark data with teachers, ensures teachers that use data to remediate deficient skills at the classroom and individual students level, and sets expectations for results. The less successful schools do not do these, so that's important that you know those things as well. Had several emails and several questions about this, and we're still trying to clear this up a little bit. That's one of the reasons I did this presentation. But benchmark pass rates, everybody wants to know if we're going to use 60 or 70%, and what does that mean? Relatively speaking, they don't mean anything for some of the factors that we've already talked about, those threats to reliability. And also that the benchmark scores are not equated to SOL scores because it's only a fraction of the material, and these tests or assessments are asking questions on what should have been taught and not necessarily what was taught. So if pacing is off, that's going to create some problems. What really does matter is how well you did relative to everyone else. That's the percentile rank. And there are formative assessments to see what they know and what they don't know. So that's how you would use them. We'll talk a little bit about the percentile rank, and the rank order allows us to compare performance in a relative manner to what everybody else is doing. And rank order allows us to compare performance and control some of the differences in measure. If you look at the percentile rank, how that's equated, percentile rank is a score of the percentage of scores that are equal to or lower than that score. And for example, a test score that is greater than or equal to 75% of the scores of people taking the test is said to be at the 75th percentile. So you see that's information here is illustrated here. Another way to look at that is that 25% outscored you at the 75th percentile. So you can look at this, for example, this first one is a pretty classic example from 100 to 75. It follows that pretty equally. But for example, this second one here, if you have 100% pass rate at 100 percentile, you could have a 99% and be at the 75th percentile. You could have a 98, be at the 50th percentile, and you could have a 97, be at the 25th percentile, depending on how everybody else did on that test. Here's another example. A 99% could be at the 100 percentile. A 77 can be at the 75th percentile. A 24 could be at the 50th percentile, and a 23% could be at the 25th percentile. So again, it's important to look at those percentile ranks. Here's one to look at the coding and how they're divided into thirds, the top third, the bottom third, and the middle third. And again, those are just divided in from 1 to 33, 34 to 66, and 67 to 100 is how those color codings will come into play. So a school here at 70% pass rate could be at the 25th percentile, and 83% pass rate could be at the 98th percentile. So we want to look at our percentile ranks. Just this percentile ranks allows us to track performance relative to SOL data. And SOL data at the end of the year is really telling you how well you did after the fact. We want to get those results before we get to the SOL test. So that's why we're doing benchmark tests. And benchmark tests are related to more like a biopsy. And these are highly aligned assessments and relative that can fill that need. So that's why we're doing benchmarks. Benchmark tests cannot be compared to SOL pass rates. Benchmark pass rates cannot be compared to SOL pass rates. We've already talked about that. First quarter benchmarks cannot be compared to second quarter benchmark because they're testing completely different material. But percentile ranks can be compared and they're valid, and percentile ranks can be used to measure progress for individual schools, school improvement, also for teacher improvement. We'll show that in just a second. This just showing that you're tracking division performance or school performance compared to percentile rank. So if you look at this, you'll see that the school that had 60% pass rate or 60th percentile on their second quarter benchmark was at the 60th percentile, and the accreditation benchmark was from the last year's testing was at the 21st percentile. So they're 39 points better than the accreditation percentile. So they want to keep that trend going to keep that going, and they're in that middle range. Again, here's history. The accreditation percentile rank was at the first percentile, which means most schools are going to be accredited in history. So if your percentile rank is at the 39th percentile, you're in relatively 38 points above the percentile rank for accreditation. You can look at that for math and for science. This information has been accurately be able to identify those schools that were coming out of accreditation and also those schools that may have problems with accreditation. It can also be used to track teacher performance. And you'll see this chart here shows that all those teachers, not all, but just a fraction of those teachers who took who gave the sixth grade reading gave the benchmarks and the excuse me, and the SOL test. So the teacher who had an 86% pass rate was at the 73rd percentile. A teacher with an 81% pass rate was at the 60th percentile. So you would consider that somewhere between a 57 to 60 percentile rank should get you in that 75% pass rate for reading. A way to track teacher performance, this is an example here. This particular teacher taught sixth grade English last year and didn't have very much success. The pass rate was at 52%, and that was the second lowest of all the teachers in CIP of the 92 teachers.
Larry Barton, line 1. Larry Barton, line 1.
He scored us at the second percentile, and then teacher A placed him on the principal placed him on an improvement plan. His goal for the 2017 school year was to have a pass rate of 69%. So the principal is going to be able to track that performance because he wants his percentile rank to be up near the 15th percentile. If he's at the second, he's going to have to increase that by at least 13 points as far as the percentile rank is concerned. Looking at third grade English from first quarter to second quarter, you can see how the percentile ranks and the scores change. For example, in 2015, a 37% pass rate was at the 83rd percentile. This particular year, 78% pass rate was at the 83rd percentile. So you want to see that relative to everybody else. So if you had a 36% pass rate or 37% pass rate during the 2016, and you would see it would be below 48th percentile. And you can see that everybody has improved, so the percentile rank compares relative performance. This, again, looking at fourth grade English, in 2015, a 74% pass rate was at the 69th percentile. And again, we're looking at this with remember the test is going to be changing. It's a CAT test. So a 73% this particular year is at the 80th percentile. This 45% rate, pass rate is at the 24th percentile. And where, as compared to 2015, the 45% pass rate was at 19th percentile. So everything is sort of moving up, or, relative to everybody else's performance. Again, that CAT test is going to make a difference. Some other information I think is useful to share with you is how does your grades that you give at the end of the year compare to your SOL scores? So some questions to consider: what final grade would you expect a student to earn if they made a 400? So the 400 is a minimum score. So you would think a student that made a D- potentially could make a 400. What grade would you expect a student to have earned a 500? You would think that would be in the B range. And what grade would you expect a student to earn a 600? That would be probably a B+ to an A. So you need to consider those two, and we'll look at that just this next slide. These are how you compare your final grades to SOL proficiency. This first teacher here, we had a 97% pass rate. 25% of her students who made an A were made pass proficient. 75% of those kids passed advanced. 60% B's, 40% B's made advanced. 100% of the kids who made C's passed. 100% who made D's passed. And half the kids who made an F passed, and half of those failed. So you can look at that in relationship to final grades. This is another content. This particular teacher didn't have any D's or F's. Those students who made A's, 60%, 67% of those passed proficient, 33% passed advanced, and you can go on down the line here. This particular teacher who had a 74% pass rate, 53%, 54% of her students who made A's passed proficient, 46% passed advanced. 100% of the kids who made D's failed. C's, 60% of who made D's failed. Only 40% passed proficient. Just to kind of wrap this up, there's things to remember. Benchmarks are formative assessments. They're not summative. Pass rates on benchmarks are not important. So 60% or 70% pass rates are not important at all. Percentile rank is the most important information we can get from benchmark tests. Percentile rank shows performance relative to accreditation benchmark. And percentile rank compares relative performance. So you want to see how well you did with your percentile rank relative to everybody else that took that particular test. And percentile rank can show growth for individual student or individual schools, teachers, and divisions. So when we look at the percentile ranks, we want to see where you're going and how that growth has been expressed. Thank you very much.